Welcome back to the 1-0 Pod. I'm Seth Engle.
I'm Zach Allen.
And we've had a busy last week, I think, on multiple different sports here. We're starting to get more into football as the spring progresses. We're now in, I believe, week 3 of spring practice now as of today. So we're in full force here. We talked with Franklin last week. Things are moving along. Things are picking up. I want to start off with a conversation about the quarterbacks because I think this is something that a lot of people are confused about right now, where Franklin's saying, okay, well, the QBs are all splitting snaps right now. Drew Eller may not finish as that number one guy in terms of reps at the end of the spring. From what you've heard, Zach, what are your takeaways from Franklin and Mike Yurcich just playing at quarterback?
Well, I think that's been the most pressing issue, or not issue, but thing he's talked about so far this spring. I think the fans, even last year, they wanted Drew to start pretty much every game, and now James has said he's splitting reps with Bo Pribula and Jackson Smolik in the quarterback room, and that they have two very different play styles. I think Drew will still start at the beginning of the season, but I think we could see something like what Penn State did with Tommy Stevens and Will Levis with Bo Pribula, because Drew's like 6'5". He's like a buffalo out there, and I think Bo kind of brings more of that read option type of athletic quarterback to the room, and I think they'll throw that in there every once in a while.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I don't want to get people confused here with saying the likelihood isn't that Drew Aller is going to be starting at quarterback, because it is. I mean, we've seen him in 9 games last year. Bo Pribula didn't appear in a single game last year. So the bottom line is we know Franklin likes to put in guys who have been in certain situations before and have the most prepared players out there at all times. Drew is that guy, simply. But what I think we're going to see, like you mentioned, is a little bit of a Tommy Stevens or a Will Levis from Bo Pribula. Maybe even something more, because I don't think we really saw Tommy or Will throw the ball that much. But from what I heard from Mike Yurcich and also what I heard from Sean Clifford the other day at Pro Day, when I asked him about the situation, is that Bo has a nice arm. Like, it's not just he's this dual threat guy that's only going to use his feet. He's a strong kid who is also athletic and can do a lot when he has the football in his hands.
And I think that's what was missing when they used those Tommy Stevens, Will Levis sets. Like,
right.
Everyone, even the fans, knew it was going to be a run up the middle, QB draw, QB power every time. And so I think Bo kind of gives a great adjustment out of that, and he can actually sling the ball.
100%. And I think it's cool, too, when you start to hear this stuff early on where they're just trying to build the blocks to their general offense right now, but they're starting to piece together kind of where each player's skill set is right now. So as Franklin said, Drew's going to be more like Sean Clifford, but Bo could be something very different that I don't know we even saw from Tommy Stevens or Will Levis, like you said. Going forward with that offense, Franklin talked a lot about wide receiver on Wednesday. Keandre Lambert-Smith is, expected to hop into that number one role right now. We know they picked up a couple transfers. Dante Cephas is still on the way. Haven't seen him yet. What do you take away from Keandre right now? Do you think he's ready to step into that number one role? And what kind of did you take away from those avails?
I mean, he's been on the team for 3 years now. This will be his 4th season. I think he's as ready as anybody in that room to be the number one receiver, which is something Penn State hasn't really had since Jahan Dotson left, so just last season. But he's one of the only veteran guys in the room that actually has some considerable playing experience. Obviously, Trey Wallace has a year under his belt. But I think Keandre has everything he needs to take that next step. We saw him in the Rose Bowl. He had a great game. And if he can keep that momentum kind of going, like James Franklin said, they want him to not only be a number one on Penn State, but in the entire Big Ten. And I think he has a skill set to make that jump this year.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Keandre is a deep ball threat. He's quick, he's fast, he's athletic. I think it really comes down to the off-field stuff, and that's what Franklin and Mike Yurcich was saying. Like, to be a number one guy, it's not just to put up number one player numbers. It's also to show that you can lead the rest of the room, which has been a topic of conversation for, I think, every position on roster this year when you lose so many seniors. So for Keandre, I think it just comes down to making the rest of the room better based on his play style. Like, because they're going to have to compete with him. You know, if he's far and away the best, they're going to have to, like, chase after his numbers and compete with his skill set. So that's what I think it really comes down to, especially when you talk about, like, spring practice right now and what you want to get out of, you know, your number one receiver.
Yeah, kind of going off the leadership point, he talked about that a lot in his availability. He said it's been a challenge, and it's always going to be a challenge trying to step into a leadership role that you kind of haven't had before,
right,
because Keandre's been the third string at his peak, and now he's stepping into the number one role. So he does have to lead those guys like Trey Wallace and the new transfers, Malik McClain, Dante Cephas, like you said. All those guys, he has to kind of step up and teach them the ropes.
Yeah, for sure. And I think when you mention the transfers, it's hard to really evaluate the whole room when Cephas isn't on campus. I mean, we've seen his film. We've, you know, heard from others that this guy is legit. There's a reason that a lot of people evaluated him as one of the top transfers on the market, but he's not here. So they're trying to, like, work around him. I wonder if they're, like, even able to, because I remember last year when the guys that didn't early enroll, those freshmen, they'd still have, like, those Zoom calls with him, with those guys like Denai Dennis Sutton and Abdul Carter, just to get them, like, acclimated to the program. Like, how exactly do you work with Dante Cephas? I don't know, especially because he hasn't, like, signed yet. So that's, like, a little wishy-washy to me, and, like, how they are actually game planning their offense around wide receivers without a guy who is a projected lock as like a number 2 or 3, maybe even a number 1 in some cases. And then Malik McClain, we've heard only good things about. We saw him at Pro Day. I mean, this guy.
I thought it was interesting that Sean Clifford was throwing to him already at his Pro Day. I think it was, Tinsley, Keandre, Brenton, his brother Liam.
Yeah, Liam was there, yeah.
And then Malik McClain, a new transfer. And he looked good. He looked crisp. He made a couple challenging catches over there.
He had that one-hander over by the sideline.
Yeah, and he bobbled it and caught it again. Yeah. But he's looked good, and I'm excited to see where Dante kind of fits into this equation now.
Yeah, for sure. I think with Malik, where it's like a guy that's, I mean, he's 6'4". Like, if you go to practice and you see him, like, sized up with the other receivers, like, he's like, this is a big dude, but then when you see him run, it's like, all right, this guy's, like, really fast and athletic and, like, long. Like, I think it was his quickness that, like, really stood out to me, where I'm like, this is a big body that's, like, moving at the same speed as everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think maybe that's a reason why they even had Sean throw to him, was just, okay, this is a guy that brings this, it's just this, like, this unique form of a receiver. Like, okay, Sean can throw to a small guy. He can throw to his brother. He can throw to a tight end. And then he can throw to this, like, almost ideal NFL wide receiver frame.
Yeah, I mean, like, they've had tall guys in the past, like Jawan Johnson and you know, Justin Shorter. But I don't think either of them were this fast and agile. When he was running the routes, it was, like, sharp cuts. And I was like, a 6'4" receiver should not be moving like this. But, you know, I think he'll be a great addition to this offense, even on the run blocking side of things. Yeah,
and then moving on, I guess we were just talking about Clifford and the Pro Day. A lot of participants there. Did not see Parker Washington. He's still working his way back when we talk about receivers. And, I mean, we talked to him about, you know, whether he actually, you know, thought he was ready to go to the NFL and what went into that thought process, considering his late season injury, and he's still saying, like, it was time. Like, I'm confident myself. I mean, I wish we got to see him perform. I still think he's a potential, you know, day 2 or 3 selection there. What did you take away from that?
Yeah, when he talked to us, he said basically that he was very close to being fully healthy again, but he didn't really participate just to not aggravate anything. But he was still there supporting his teammates. I mean, I agree with what you said. I think he'll be a day 2 or 3 selection. I think he probably wished he had a better year last season. He kind of missed a few games with injuries there. But yeah, I think he'll be a solid slot guy. I know he was telling us also that he's been telling coaches, scouts, that he'll play any position on the field, whether it's slot, out wide. He said, I think he even said, like, maybe even out of the backfield at one point.
Yeah.
So he's a very versatile guy. It was a shame, like you said, we didn't get to see him run any routes or for one last hurrah. But I think he'll be selected.
Yeah. I mean, I think this year is really interesting when you look at the Penn State guys going to the draft, because I feel like almost every year there are guys that have this major boost from the combine and their pro day. Like, that just typically is the way Penn State does things, especially historically with Dwight Galt as strength coach, who's not anymore, now it's Chuck Losey. There are these Penn State guys like Adafe Owe who just, like, rise up, you know, from like day 2 or 3 grades to, okay, this guy should be a first-round pick. And this year it's kind of the opposite. And I feel like it's almost been that now some of these Penn State guys going to the draft are almost sleepers. Like Brenton Strange and P.J. Mustipher didn't perform that great in the combine. It's just, I mean, their numbers just weren't that great. But, like, you look at them and you talk to them and you watch their film, and it's like, why aren't these guys, you know, in more conversations to be, you know, selected higher?
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's what I see ahead of April. And then Sean Clifford, I mean, didn't even get a combine invite.
Yeah, he did say he felt snubbed by that. But I think he had a great pro day just from the athletic side of things. Obviously, we know he can throw. He performed well in the throwing drills. But he ran a sub 4.6 40, which is very impressive for a quarterback. And I think kind of contrary to the sleeper point, I think Sean Clifford still is in that sleeper category. But I think he maybe boosted his draft stock a tiny bit in that regard. But, I mean, I agree with you overall, though. Like, it's a lot of, outside of Joey Porter and, you know, Jair Brown a little bit, he might even be considered a sleeper. It's a lot of potential with these guys that, if they're developed right, can definitely be NFL caliber players. It's just whether they do that or not.
Yeah. I agree with you on Clifford, though. I mean, he ran well. He had some overthrows. He could have done a little better in that category, but he's talked to NFL teams. You know, we saw that report. Well, he confirmed that the Broncos did talk to him, but we saw that report from a few days ago where the Broncos only had 3 calls that they were able to make, and one of those calls went out to Sean Clifford. So I think that says something. Like, he's a guy you want to have in your locker room. Like, we've heard firsthand and seen firsthand, you know, how much of a vocal leader that dude is. And then the impact of that when you look forward to Drew Aller, who's much, you know, quieter, more composed, you know, how that actually impacts Penn State in the long run, I think will say a lot.
Yeah.
So that's it for us. I think we covered a lot there. It's Want to Know Pod. You can follow us on Twitter at PSU Footblog and find us online at collegian.psu.edu. Peace.